Welcome, Irish fans, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, live edition. This is our Friday live mailbag, and I'm excited, Brian. I had a really good time with this last week. We had such good questions, and we had such good participation from the viewers that I'm really pumped up about this one. I'm wondering what they're going to bring us this time. I don't know how you felt about last week, but that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was, and I took a little bit of a risk. I didn't really get seek a lot of early questions, hoping that people would show up and ask questions. So we'll see if that pans out. But yeah, this is going to be fun. And look, people asked last week, are we going to make this a normal thing? And our goal and our plan is to, as long as people show up, listen, and want to ask questions, that we'll do it. So and we may get to the point where we do it a little bit more than we're doing it now. So certainly our goal and our plan, and sometimes we'll go into it where we'll just open it up to questions, and sometimes we may start off with a topic and then allow people to ask questions about that topic. So we'll try to mix it up, keep it fresh, because eventually when we get as many questions as we got last time, we may run out of questions after a while. So this is going to be fun, and I'm looking forward to doing this. And it's gone well enough so far that we're already talking about doing live post game shows and after events, things like that. So it's you guys show up, you guys listen and watch, and you all ask questions, and we'll be here to answer them as best as we can.
Well, and we got a few questions off the jump from some of the social media platforms you put out there that we're doing a mailbag, and some people responded, and so we'll start with those. And then
before we start with the questions, though, Vince, I did want to talk a little bit about. Obviously, Pete Sampson yesterday from The Athletic reported that Kyle Hamilton had ankle surgery, minor ankle surgery, and they said he's going to be limited in the spring. So if you guys want to ask about that, I had an article at irishbreakdown.com today where I talked about how I think that could actually be a blessing for Notre Dame. So if anybody wants to ask questions about that, feel free. And then also, if you have some recruiting questions, feel free to ask those too. But so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there in case anybody had not heard yet that he did have that. And that's obviously one of the newsworthy things that has happened in the last couple of days.
Okay, Brian, you know what? I'm going to kick this off with a question of my own for you based on the Kyle Hamilton stuff. Is Kyle Hamilton the most irreplaceable player on Notre Dame's roster?
And
I'm throwing it. We did not discuss this. I'm throwing it at you. I want to see what you got to say.
I would probably say yes, for a couple reasons. Number one, I think he's going to be their best overall player next year.
Yep.
I don't think that's, to me, really going to be a question. If somebody is better than Kyle Hamilton next year, it means somebody has a major breakout, because Kyle Hamilton's going to be good as long as he's healthy. And this injury seems like it was a minor thing. It was not a major issue, so it's not going to be a long-term problem. So I think obviously if you were to lose your best player, that would be a problem. But I think beyond that, the lack of depth at that position makes it even a bigger problem, And so for you look at like Kyron Williams, right? Like losing Kyron Williams would stink. Like that would hurt. But you look and say, well, it's a position that's dependent upon the offensive line, and they've got other good players there. Chris Tyree, the incoming freshman, those kind of guys, they could be okay.
Sure.
You lose Michael Mayer, that would sting big time. But you've got Kevin Bauman, you've got Kane Barong, you've got George Takis. You feel like you'd be okay. After Kyle Hamilton, if Houston Griffith steps up, he's the other starter at safety.
And then
who steps into the mix? So I think it's that combination of, he's excellent, with the fact that I don't know who would replace him, and I don't feel great about who would replace him, makes him, I would say, he's their most irreplaceable player next year.
Okay. Well, we're starting to get some questions here from the live listeners, viewers, right? And we're going to start going with those. So John A1, what is Jarrett Patterson's most natural position?
I mean, I think his most natural position is actually, I think it's tackle. I still would say tackle. I think that his athleticism in space is excellent. We see it when he works in the screen game, when he works in the second level. He's very natural in space. He's got great feet. Really, this is going to sound weird, but like really loose ankles, and that's important because tight ankles means you have really a hard time changing direction. He's a really loose guy. pick up twists and stunts. I think he can play tackle in college at a very high level. I don't know if I would say it's his best position if we're projecting him to the NFL. I don't think it's his best position. I think center guard probably, but that could be determined by, I don't know what his length is. And that's going to be, if he's got 33 plus inch arms, then I could see him playing tackle at the next level. I don't know if he has that kind of arm length, to play in the edge. But I think athletically, I think he's a natural tackle. And the reason I've kind of pushed for him to play tackle or to move somewhere else is I actually think that would be the best thing for improving his draft stock. You have a guy that's a center, and NFL teams look at him and say, maybe we can play center or guard, but he's a center and we know he can play center. Allow him to go move at tackle and thrive at tackle, which I think he would do. Now NFL teams can say, hey, we don't need to just look at him because we have a need at center. This is a guy that can play tackle. This is a guy that can play guard. This is a guy that can play at a high level at multiple positions. And I think that would be incredibly beneficial for him personally. And then, of course, I do also believe it would help Notre Dame's offensive line because it allows him to move to a more premium position, but then also gives them the opportunity to get Zeke Correll into the lineup at a position where I think his game is best suited.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I love the versatility of Jarrett Patterson. I think that that is what is going to benefit Notre Dame. And I agree with you in the fact that moving him to tackle is the best move for Notre Dame this year because I'm very confident in what Zeke Correll brings to the table at center. And I'm very confident in what Jarrett Patterson brings to the table at tackle. And you're right. If we're projecting into the NFL, I would probably have him as an interior guy as of right now.
I'd want to see his measurables. I'd want to see his arm length. That would be the big key for me.
And I don't have a year's worth of tackle film to look at either. I mean, if he excels at tackle, that just increases his stock in the NFL.
That's the point, Vince. If he goes out to tackle, plays well, and then goes to the combine and measures in, or the Senior Bowl measures in with like 33 and a half or 34-inch arms, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, you've got tackle length, because the New England Patriots drafted a guy a couple years ago out of Georgia that was 6'2", but he had really long arms, and so they kept him at tackle.
Right.
So, that's the thing is it's not so much the height, it's the length. And 6'4", he's got plenty of height to play the position. But again, you could be 6'6" with stubby arms and you're not going to be a tackle. You could be 6'3" with really long arms and you could play tackle if you have the athleticism and the feel on the edge. Some guys are athletic enough to play tackle, but they don't have they're not comfortable in space. They're not comfortable on an island, which a tackle, especially in the NFL, you have to be on an island. You have to be able to go by yourself, block a defensive end with a lot less help. And that's what we talked about in a previous show, talking about the offensive line. Tackle is the hardest position to help. And if you have to help a tackle because he can't handle playing there, it just disrupts your entire offense. Whereas center, it's much easier to protect a center. You have two guards, you can move the pocket, you can do all types of different things to protect a center with a little bit greater ease than you can a tackle.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to another question. This one from David Knight. And I just love the way this one is worded. That's why I really want to get this one up here. But after BK's evolution in 2016, is it me or does it seem like he's slipping back into pre-Revolutionary War? So pre-2016. That's the social studies teacher and me coming out. But basically, is Kelly slipping back into the way he was before 2016?
I don't think he ever changed. I mean, I know there was all this talk about how he changed, but I was never told by any insider that I know that he'd actually changed. I think the big change was he hired better people, and that's to me what a coach is supposed to do. That's not a criticism of Brian Kelly per se. Brian Kelly is who he is when it comes to, he's just never going to be the coach that has a relationship with all the players and all the parents. That's just not who he is.
Well, we had heard that he was coming in early to workouts and doing all that.
Look, that's, for spring, maybe that first spring, but that's fine. The players are going to see that, but ultimately that's not what matters. What matters is do I feel like at any time I can go up to I've had conversation with players who have left the program and said, I literally never had a conversation with Brian Kelly that was more than hi bye. But that's okay. I don't think the head coach necessarily has to have that kind of bond with his entire team, as long as you give your assistants and your coordinators the sort of power to have that kind of connection. And some coaches want that. Some coaches say, I want to purposely be distant because I want them depending on you. I want them to feel that they need to go to you to have those connections and those relationships. And so I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think my issue with Brian Kelly back in pre-2016, because Vince, you remember, I was trying to sound a warning on the program during the 2015 season, and they were this many plays away from being undefeated. And I'm like, there's some serious flaws in this program, and when they don't have Jalen Smith and they don't have Will Fuller and they don't have these guys, they're going to get exposed. And that's what happened. I was complaining about the strength program. I was complaining about the defense. There was a lot of holes in the program that Brian Kelly wasn't addressing because he wasn't around enough and didn't have his finger on the pulse, which he says he's going to do enough to really address them.
Sure. After
2016, he made great hires. He went out and got Matt Bayless to run the strength program. He went and got Chip Long. He went out and got Mike Elko, and then who brought in Clark Lee, and then he promoted Clark Lee. So he's made some really strong hires in that regards. And I'm not one of those people who says, I've heard people that don't like Brian. Well, he's only won because he hired coaches. Well, yeah, that's kind of part of a head coach's job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right. Like, you'll say, Urban only won because he hired Ryan Day and Tom Herman. Yeah, because he's a smart coach who hired really great coaches. That's kind of part of your job. So kudos to him for doing that. And then look, going out and getting Marcus Freeman to run the defense. That was a great job by Brian Kelly and all the people involved in that type of deal, because he can't do it by himself. I mean, he needs people to be able to back him financially and those kind of things, give him the tools to go out and do it. And so, but he hasn't changed a whole lot. And my concern is that in the areas where he is heavily involved, he is not allowing the necessary evolution within the program that needs to happen. I think defensively, Brian Kelly sort of backed off and said, I'm going to go hire an outsider. And the control of the defense has been in outsider hands ever since, really, because Clark Lee was technically an outsider. He was not someone he'd worked for Brian Kelly for a year when he got the D coordinator up. And the defense has thrived because Brian Kelly has set the agenda. This is my expectation for you. Now go do it. And the defensive coaches have lived up to the expectations. Now he needs to do the same thing for the offense, as we talked about before. So those things are a little bit concerning, but I also feel like they're just a couple moves away, from taking that next step. And that is the key. Because, I'm hard on Brian Kelly. I get that. And that bothers some people. But I'm hard on him because the expectation at Notre Dame is you compete for championships. Yeah. And you don't make excuses for I don't get there. But the fact that he's making excuses for not beating the great teams is because he's got them to the point where that's all that's left. And he deserves a great deal of credit for that. But at the same time, we can praise him for that, but then hold him accountable for, but there's still a couple steps you've got to take as the head coach to come over the hump. And that's the exciting thing about covering this team, is because it's like, man, if he just does this team's got a chance to go. But that's also kind of what makes it frustrating, because they are so close.
We got a couple of depth questions that I want to get to here. First one from Cole. Do you think TaRiq Bracy will get passed over as the second cornerback? I can't. I have no clue, Cole. I wish I had an answer for that. I think if TaRiq Bracy shows up and is the TaRiq Bracy of old, then no, he won't get passed over. He'll play and he'll be a key part of this, because Marcus Freeman likes to play a lot of man coverage. And TaRiq Bracy is probably, from what we've seen, when he's on his game, he's their best man cover defender. And we've seen him go against some really good wideouts. I remember in 2018 when they played Florida State and TaRiq got really his second most extensive action of the season, besides the Pitt game when he was brilliant, and they kept going at him, and he kept blanketing the Florida State receivers. Georgia in 2019, he was excellent in that game. But then we've seen him with the downs. Virginia, he was down. And so that consistency is just going to be the key for him. But if he gets his confidence back, then no, he won't get passed over. If he's still doubting himself, then there's enough talent now at cornerback to pass him over. I mean, when you're bringing in Philip Riley and you're bringing in Ryan Barnes and JoJo Johnson and Clarence Lewis, Chance Tucker, and you've got Clarence Lewis coming back. You've got a guy like Ramon Henderson who's got a lot of tools. You got KJ Wallace, who you could move back to corner. You moved him to safety last year because you needed depth at safety. The point being, there's a lot of athletes at that position. You can't afford to continue to throw a guy out there that doesn't have the confidence to thrive at the position. So I don't think he's going to get a necessarily long, go at this to improve himself. But I think if the coaches are smart, and I think Mike Mickens is really smart and a really good coach,
he understands how important TaRiq Bracy can be to this defense. I think they're going to do what they need to do to try to get him there. But at the end of the day, you can't give someone confidence. They need to have it. And at the end of the day, it's going to be up to TaRiq to get it done. And if he does, he's going to be he's kind of not my pick, but my hope that when we talk at the end of the 2021 season, that he's the guy we're picking in our superlatives as the bounce back player. Because if he bounces back, it changes the defense. Completely changes the defense.
No doubt. I love TaRiq Bracy, and I realize that he's probably not on the best side of a lot of fans because of what happened towards the end of the season.
It's understandable. Not bad.
Totally
get it.
I get it. But I love that kid, man. I love what he brings to the table. And I mean, you outlined where he was good and where he was bad. I mean, we don't have to rehash that. But from a personal standpoint, I really hope he gets it together. Mm-hmm. Not only for himself, but then if he does get it together, like you said, this defense could go to a whole other level because I really do believe that he is the best cover corner on this team. And if he's good, then those other guys can marinate just a little bit longer. They don't have to have the pressure. You're not bringing in a guy who has no experience to be the number 2 corner. I mean, you're asking Clarence Lewis to be the number 1, which is what I'm assuming the Cole was figuring there.
Right.
And then you're going to have somebody with no experience whatsoever as your second corner. So if TaRiq Bracy is back to himself, you're allowing those guys to play, but not with the pressure that they would have had to play with.
Couple things about this. So number one is I've done some digging on this. Notre Dame will still be a field boundary corner situation. However, they're going to be a lot more flexible to go left, right if teams push tempo. So like against USC, they'll probably go left, right. Against teams that when they play Wake Forest, they'll be left, right. So there's going to be more flexibility there. So there still will be a field boundary component to this defense.
Right.
So that's one thing to consider and understand about what they're going to do, because that was a question mark, because you couldn't tell at Cincinnati because they play so many tempo teams. I mean, they have to go right, left almost every week because most of the teams in the AAC are push the tempo teams. So but at the heart, if they're playing base teams or teams go normal tempo, they will be left to right. So, they'll be boundary field. So that helps TaRiq too, because then Notre Dame doesn't play as many up-tempo teams as Cincinnati did. So there'll be more opportunities to kind of go field boundary, which you want TaRiq playing the field, number one, because of his cover ability. Number two is size. You don't want him playing the boundary all day long. The other part of it too, Vince, is when you watch the Alabama game and you go back and you watch, you say, boy, I wish TaRiq did not have his mental collapse, because he's the one guy athletically that can run with the Bama receivers.
Sure.
And especially like Mechie, a lot of people have a hard time running with Devontae Smith, not just because of his athleticism, but his great route running. But I'm more looking at those number 2 guys, because the thing about having a guy like TaRiq Bracy is if he's able to say, hey, if he's at his best, you say, hey, go cover that guy. And then now you can not only put your second and third, your third and fourth corners at different positions, the nickel, those other things. But even beyond that, you can now say, hey, they've got this big boundary receiver. So we're going to use our safeties to go protect Clarence in the boundary against, this big stud receiver that we're facing against. Or you can then use your safeties to move around, knowing that you have confidence that TaRiq Bracy can go out and cover that guy. You don't have to protect him over top as much as you may a true freshman. But I will also say this, Vince, and we'll move on. Cornerback is one position on defense that I'm more comfortable with a freshman playing, because it is so much more about just, are you physically good enough? Do you have the confidence to go play? It's kind of like running back for me, in that it's just a position that, because you don't need to be a year in the weight room and those kind of things. You either have the physical tools to do it or you don't.
Yeah, you're right.
And however quickly you pick up the defense, you can go play. So that's why it's a position where I'm more comfortable plugging a freshman in there than I would be like Prince Colley at linebacker or Gabriel Rubio at defensive tackle, because there's more of a physicality component to those positions than there is corner. And corner isn't like safety, where you have to have so much more understanding. It's like, hey, you see that guy? Go cover him. Here's your technique. Go cover him.
It's like backyard football.
It's not that simple, but it is hyperbolically. You get what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. A couple more, depth chart type questions, and we had this one from multiple people, but David is actually the one that wrote it down live. We had one from one of the pre-questions. But does Litchfield Ajivon ever play, or is he going to ride the pine? So.
David's killing it today with his the boldness of his questions. So
I love it.
That's going to be this spring's going to determine that, David. I mean, you look, part of the thing is with Litchfield is I've heard some good things from different sources about how he's done in practice. He's small. That's a knock on him. And safety, I think, it's a little bit more problematic there because you can find yourself matched up with tight ends and some bigger players at times, and it influences your range a little bit when you're an undersized safety. But I've heard he's instinctive and he's a good player. He just hasn't played. So it's kind of like there's this disconnect between what I hear about what he can do, but then it's like, well, if he can do that, then why is he not at least playing special teams? And I think he played like 20 special team snaps this year. So that's kind of a question mark. But look, this spring is going to determine that because there's a need, right? They want to play 3 safeties. That's what Marcus Freeman has always done. Right now, they're looking at who can be the third linebacker, who can be the third corner that we can play there because there's not a great deal of confidence in the safety position right now. With Kyle Hamilton limited, if he is limited in the spring, which is what the Pete reported, there's an opportunity for these safeties to step into the lineup and get extra reps. And so the first person this impacts is Houston Griffith, right? Because now when Kyle's out, Houston has to now be the leader. He has to be the communicator, and he has to be the playmaker. And so that's the opportunity Houston's been dying for, right? Now he's going to get it.
I love it.
And so it's sink or swim, right? You're throwing him to the deep end and saying sink or swim, you know? And so that could really help him develop and kind of help him come along. But then after that, who's that third safety going to be? Who's that fourth safety going to be? Right. And so obviously DJ Brown will get a shot at that. But this is an opportunity for Litchfield and Justin Walters, who's the early enrollee freshman, to kind of step in and play. For KJ Wallace, if they decide to keep him at safety, which I think he's going to be a bit of a swing guy. There's going to be extra reps at times this spring for those guys to show themselves. So that's why I say in a lot of ways, Kyle Hamilton kind of having an ankle injury that's not severe, because it's never a blessing to have a severe injury. It's a blessing because A, it's not a severe injury, and B, because this presents a position where you needed to get guys experience and opportunities and to test them. What can you do? Exactly. Do we need to go get Kerry G, or do we need to move Philip Riley, or do we need to do something else? But you're going to get your shot now in the spring to go prove yourself, and it's going to be up to you. And that's the exciting part. So if Litchfield has not made a move by the end of the spring, then he's going to get passed by pretty quickly. So again, ask me that question again at the end of spring after I've been able to do some digging. Right now, it's hard for me to say because we've never seen him really do anything in a Notre Dame uniform besides run down on a couple special teams coverage units situations.
Of all the positions where, and again, you don't wish for injuries, but of all the positions where I want more reps for depth, it's that safety position. I mean, because we just
on defense, on
defense, we just don't know what that depth chart is going to look like and the numbers, and if they're going to move anybody there and all of that. And Kyle Hamilton is Kyle Hamilton. He's going to be able to, enter fall camp and he'll be fine. He doesn't necessarily need the spring reps. Now he can always get better. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But he can get his mental reps in the spring.
That's the big thing for Kyle. Yeah. And I almost think that might be better for him.
Yeah.
Because he's such a smart, heady player.
Yes.
I feel like having him back by the safeties coach or by the D coordinator and seeing the game from their standpoint, because he can't take reps, would be such a good thing. Because I think he would just soak that in.
I agree.
Like Kyle Hamilton's the kind of guy that he's going to go to the NFL, play a long time, and he's either going to run a company and make millions of dollars, or he's going to decide to be a coach.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he's just such a smart kid. But I could see him being a guy that down the road would be a coordinator, because he's just the game's so natural to him. You meet those guys, Vince, like whatever it is, like the game's just natural to them. They just it just grasps it. It's a subject that they just grasp easily. That's how Kyle Hamilton is, which is why you rarely see him make the same mistake twice.
Yep.
And so I think there might be some benefit to him as well by being on the back end and saying, hey, let me not worry about playing or communicating. Let me see it through the coach's eyes. And man, I think that could help him become a better player. So there's really as long as he gets healthy, to me, there's no negative to him being limited in the spring.
Yeah, it's funny. You see You see kids that you coach and you talk to them. And I had a kid that I coached as a freshman. He was 14 years old. And I was like, this kid's going to be a coach. Like you can just tell. And he ended up being the quarterback of our team, et cetera, et cetera. And now he's coaching down at Cathedral down in the Indianapolis area. And he's a heck of a coach and he's a heck of a good kid. But you can just tell that was his path. You know what I mean? And it's the same situation. It's like you can tell guys who have it. You know, whether it's understanding of the game, how to explain the game to others, you know, all of that you can tell. And I, from what you're gathering, or what I'm gathering from you, that's Kyle Hamilton.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's fun to play with those guys, man. It's fun,
especially when they're freaky out and they're 6'4", 250 pounds that can run.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of athletic, I've got another depth question here for you from John. Does Nana Asaf-Mensah have a shot to play with Ovi transferring? And he was a big name coming in when he was recruited.
He will have an opportunity to crack the lineup this year, but it won't have anything to do with Ovi leaving. He is actually a strong side end, so he's that big end that they talk about. Ovi was more of the Viper drop player. So right now, I don't think that there's a – right now, they're going to move Myron Tungavaloa most of the strong side end, which we've reported at Irish Breakdown in the past. And then obviously Justin Adamiola is a guy that the staff has a great deal of confidence being part of that 1-2 punch. So I think Nana is going to have a tough time cracking the two deep this year. Now, maybe he plays so well that they're saying, hey, we got to carve out 5-10 reps for him. Maybe we can get him in some goal lines or something like that. Or if somebody goes down, but that's going to be a tough thing for him. It's not necessarily because he can't play. It's just a really talented depth chart. I mean, he's trying to beat out some guys that are really good football players and older than him too. That's the other thing. It's not like he's been passed up by someone younger than him.
It's just a deep
right. It's just, and then the injury he suffered last year in fall camp kind of set back his development to where now he's even further behind. But essentially, the COVID year benefited him greatly because he didn't technically lose a year of eligibility, so he can go into 2021 still technically being a redshirt freshman, meaning if they like him enough to want to bring him back, he'll have extra seasons. But he's going to have to start proving himself here pretty soon because with Jason Onye on campus, with Alexander Ahrensberger now going into year 2, they just, with Tyson Ford committed, there's going to be some really good young players that are going to be pushing him. So this is going to – even though it may not show it in 2021, this is going to be a big year for him because what you do as coaches is you start to look at your young players and say, okay, who looks like they're progressing? Who looks like a guy that maybe it's not this year because of our depth, but the year after we can count on, and who's not? Because the guys that are not, you start really looking to, okay, we're going to have to over-recruit them. It doesn't mean you bring in good players because you always do that, but you may bring in an extra guy at that position numbers-wise that you wouldn't have otherwise because you don't feel you can count on this guy. So it's a big offseason for Nana to show that, hey, even if I can't crack the lineup a lot this year, I'm ready to play when I can. But then going into 2022, that spring when Myron's gone, and this is my chance to shine and really force my way on the field. So it is a big opportunity for him, but I don't see that necessarily coming this season, and it won't be because of Ovi transferring.
So we've got a lot of young guy questions and a lot of recruiting questions. So I'm going to get a young guy question in, and then I'm going to put some recruiting questions together. So going a little out of order here from the way that they're coming in. Matty K, double nickel. That's what I'm going with for 55. Double nickel. Is there any chance young guys like Tosh Baker, Blake Fisher, or Kristofic get some time, or do you think Kelly will rely on veterans?
Well, at least one of those guys are going to have to play because they don't have enough veterans to field an offensive line. I mean, Andrew Kristofic especially is now going into a situation where he kind of is a veteran now. He's going to be a junior this year, redshirt sophomore, but third year in the program. He's now one of the more experienced players that they have as far as years in the program. So, from what I've been told, there's going to be competition at every position that Jarrett Patterson's not playing. And, Josh Lugg too. But, what I mean by that is Josh Lugg's going to start this year, barring injury.
It depends on
where, right? So there may be some, like let's say he starts at right tackle, right, to start the spring, and Andrew Kristofic just has a great first 2 weeks of spring. That may result in them saying, hey, well, let's move one of them to guard and give that guy a shot to compete there. So there will be competition everywhere that Jarrett Patterson's not playing. as far as competition for a starting position. So I absolutely think Blake Fisher will get an opportunity. Will it be harder for him and Rocco Spindler is another guy that I would have thrown in there? Yeah, it'll probably be a little harder for them because they're freshmen, but every freshman that we've seen get legitimate playing time, and there's really only been two, is Steve Elmer and Robert Hainsey were both early enrollees. And I think that Blake comes in with the advantage of he's more physically ready to play. They put a picture of him out on Twitter the other day in his uniform. I think that probably shows better than anything we've said in the past of he's not fat. He's
right.
just huge, right? Like Quentin Nelson's like 335, 340 pounds, but he's not fat. He's just big head, broad shoulders, big hands, big feet, big everything. And that's kind of how Blake is. He's worked hard to reshape his body. Now, does he still have some baby fat on him? Sure, but he's not like this big kid. He's like, we got 30 pounds off that kid. You know, like Lewis Nix was when he got here as a freshman. Yeah. Like he needed to get a lot of weight off. That's not Blake Fisher. So will he have a chance to play? I think so. I think Rocco Spindler will if they have big springs. And there's going to be the rep opportunities, especially if Jarrett Patterson's limited in the spring. There's going to be there's a lot more opportunities. So Tosh Baker's another one. I think he still might be a year away physically. You watched him play against Syracuse, and he's still a skinny kid, but tons of upside, tons of tools. So yeah, I think some of those young guys are going to get a chance to compete. There's not a lot of confidence in some of the veterans. That are right now projected to kind of maybe start the spring at number one. There's not the level of confidence in them to just grab hold of a job and turn it,
never let it go. Yeah.
Than maybe there has been in the past.
I love that.
So I think there's going to be a ton of competition. My only hope is that at least 3 or 4 guys seize hold of the starting jobs by the end of spring, because you do not want to go into fall looking to still figure out what your 5-man rotation is going to be on the offensive line. We saw that back in 2014. And it took that offensive line about half the season to finally figure out what was going on. And then they had to move guys around. They put Matt Hegarty in the lineup and had to move Nick Martin to guard. And they started Christian Lombard I think they started him at guard and then Elmer at tackle. And then they had to flip him. You just don't want to get yourself in that situation. You want to have your line. You want your quarterback to know, here's your line.
Yes.
Now let's go with it.
That's exactly right.
You can't force it, but you hope that it happens sooner rather than later, which is dependent upon players saying, hey, I'm the best guy. Why are we still messing around with this?
Yes.
I'm the dude. Play me. This is my job. And that's what you always want as a coach, but especially this year with the offensive line.
All right, you ready for a couple of recruiting questions?
Yeah. Hey, I see my guy Sean Davis is here. So that's my guy. I've been on a podcast with him. Sean, thanks for being in the show, my man. I appreciate you being here. So just saw that he jumped in. That's my dude right there.
He's on the show.
So yeah.
All right.
Let's keep going.
Samuel Ramirez. Guys, I love your work. Thank you, Samuel. We love you too. I have 2 recruiting questions. The first one is if DJ Weslack, I'm probably going to butcher his name, commits, what will it mean for Cyrus Moss? Is he off the board? And also if ND gets Taylor and Scrouth. Do you
think that's Scrouth? Yeah, so that'd be Jake Taylor, the offensive lineman from Nevada, and Billy Scrouth, who is I believe that's how you say his last name, who's an offensive lineman from Wisconsin.
Okay.
Let me take the first one. That would be DJ Weslack is a defensive end from St. Louis. Very talented player, 6'5", about 230. There's been some crystal balls floating around about him picking Notre Dame. I don't know if that's something that'll happen soon. I don't know if that's something that Notre Dame is necessarily pushing to happen right now. I think they're still recruiting a lot of top ends. I have to think that they would be smart enough to still keep Cyrus Moss an option. From everything I've heard, Cyrus Moss likes Notre Dame a lot. I don't think it's in a situation where he's going to commit tomorrow. Be nice if he did. He's a game changer in my opinion. But so I think one of 2 things happens. One is they don't necessarily push for that third defensive end commitment, or if they do, they are still going to take Cyrus Moss and talk to him about, look, you have some flexibility. You can play some weak side linebacker. You can play some Viper end. He's the kind of guy, Vince, that you always make room for.
And that's what I was going to say. He's the kind of recruit that even if your position is closed,
right,
and he commits, you're like, yep, we got a spot for you. Don't worry about it. And I think that's where Cyrus Moss fits in.
He has to be.
Yeah,
he has to be.
You're not going to turn down a commitment from Cyrus Moss.
But it also is a thing where you have to make sure you still recruit him just as hard. That's the mistake that I think Notre Dame does at times at other positions is they meet their needs and then they stop recruiting the dudes because we don't have room. You always make room.
Always have room.
And so they have to do it. So I would hope that they would not move out on him. Now, as far as the offensive line, the question basically saying, I believe he's asking, is if Notre Dame gets Jake Taylor, who's a tackle from Bishop Gorman, same high school as Cyrus Moss, by the way, they're teammates. Billy Schrouth, who I kind of view as a tackle guard kind of guy. Would you consider the class to be elite with Joey Tanona and Ty Chan? I would not consider that an elite class because I don't think any of those guys are elite players yet. I love Jake Taylor. You know that. I think right now Oklahoma is the team to beat. But Notre Dame is still pushing. But I love Jake Taylor's upside. He's not ranked real high, but I don't care. I think his talent is really, really good. But he's kind of a little bit of a lower floor, high ceiling guy that's going to need a little bit of time. Love what Joey Tanona did as a junior at center. They moved him from tackle as a sophomore to junior center as a junior, and I thought he was outstanding. So he'd be probably their best on my board, the highest ranked guy coming out of high school of those four. But I think to have an elite line, you either need a fifth guy that's equal to those players, or you need a stud. So you need a Zach Rice type of guy to be elite. Now, would that foursome be really good? Would it be one of the 5 to 10 best lines in the country? Absolutely. But my concern with that group would be it's still half of it is probably guards or interior bodies. And right. I think that Notre Dame needs a third tackle body in this class, meaning a guy that could play tackle. Because it's a lot easier to move tackles to guard, as Notre Dame has made a living with for a decade.
And I love that strategy, by the way.
Right.
I love it.
Right. And it's a lot easier to do that than to move a guy that's maybe a little bit more natural inside, move him out. It's just a little harder to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why I would say you would need it. And I saw that the question about Weslack was asked a couple times about that. But yeah, I hope that makes it clear. I don't know what the answer would be to that. I have not gotten definitive word on that. I'll try to figure that out this weekend and ask around, but I'd have a hard time believing that Notre Dame would stop recruiting Cyrus Moss if they got a commitment from anybody. He's just too good. That would be a mistake at a position that they haven't made a lot of mistakes at in recent seasons.
Is it wrong that every time you say Jake Taylor, I think of the movie Major League?
No, it's not wrong. It's actually brownie points that you do.
That's all I think about. Every time you say Jake Taylor, I'm like, he's the catcher for the Indians.
If there was like a corner named Ricky Vaughn, would you not think of the Wild? Of course you would. So no, there's nothing wrong. It makes you look, it makes you probably, some of these people are like, what is he talking about? It makes you look old.
Well, that's
but
fair.
It doesn't, it's not wrong. It's actually right. It's very right.
I like that. Okay, thank you. There's a reason that we get along. All right. We got a great question here from Joel Gallegos. Love the show, fellas. Do you foresee BK going with a two-back system with Williams and Tyree to spread out defenses? Both are dynamic, explosive, with the ball in their hands. Can I start this, please?
You're the MC of this, so you can say whatever you want.
I hope he does.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if I've got two explosive backs, as you said, they're both explosive, they're both dynamic. How can you not have those guys on the field? My other job where I work at WSBT, one of our co-hosts said, well, I said, I want to get Tyree on the field more. And they're like, well, if you're going to take Kyron Williams off the field, then I don't want to do that. I said, well, why
do you do? First of all, yes, you do.
Yes, I have no problem with that. And besides, why do you have to take them off the field?
Right.
You can have both of those guys in the game at the same time. If you want to run split backs, if you want to put one in the slot, I mean, there's a million different things you can do with both of those guys. And if you give Tyree more reps and you give Kyron Williams a couple of less reps, that's okay too, because you're saving his legs as well for the entire season. But you're also
giving the defense something else to game plan for.
Absolutely.
That's this notion that is a 1980s way of looking at it. And even back then, teams used multiple backs. You cannot have a guy that plays 75 snaps on offense at running back. You just can't. He'll wear down, especially a guy at Kyron Williams' size. But also, from a sheer strategy standpoint, Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree have some carryover of their game, but they have different strengths. You always want to give defenses more to think about. Yes. Now, to answer Joel's question, don't know, because they're not sharing that with us. I'm hopeful. I'm a little more hopeful that they're going to make that change than some of the other changes, because we've seen it before. We've seen Brian Kelly use multiple backs before. When they started getting Jonas Gray and Sierra Wood rolling together in 2011, the offense looked really good.
Yes.
2012, they used 3 backs in 2012. Obviously, Theo was your guy, but then you'd use Sierra Wood in a way that I would hope that they would use Chris Tyree as a runner, sort of that, Theo would pound you, and then Sierra would kind of come in with that smooth running style and just gas you like he did against Oklahoma. And then, of course, they'd bring in George Atkinson as sort of the game breaker. So they would use 3 backs back then. So it's not 2015. We didn't see it as much, but a little different situation because those guys were freshmen. Josh Adams was a freshman, but look, they moved CJ Prosise to running back in the spring because they were going to use him and Torian Folston together.
Yes.
So they weren't just going to have one of them play. They weren't moving CJ Prosise, who had like 500 receiving yards the year before as the starting slot, to running back to just give Torian a breather, right? Yeah. They were going to use both of them. So that is something that has been a part of what Brian Kelly's done. So I'm optimistic that now that Chris Tyree is a sophomore, that they will figure out more ways to do it. So, and again, I
have though, if you're Tommy
Reed.
We've
seen that though. That's the reason I'm a little bit more optimistic, because we have seen that. 2010, we saw it. They used right. Armando and Robert Hughes and Jonas a little bit. So I mean, we've seen them do that in the past. So it gives me a little bit more confidence. Now, how they'll do it remains to be seen, but we even saw little glimpses of it this year. They weren't afraid to put Kyron in the slot and let him run routes against safeties and corners because he can do it. And I think that's the dynamic that Kyron is really the reason it works.
Yes.
Because he can be
that versatile.
Yeah, he can line up in the slot and run route. We've seen him smoke Kyle Hamilton his first spring on camp, or would be his second or first fall camp when Kyle showed up. He was smoking Kyle Hamilton on corner routes, Now he'd do it once or twice, but then it didn't work because, as I said, Kyle, you enjoy your early wins against Kyle Hamilton, because once you beat him once or twice, it's like, well, you're never going to do that again,
right?
And so, but yes, I think I that's one thing that I am actually cautiously optimistic about as far as being an adaptation or a change, because it's not a wholesale change. It's more of a let's do something we've done in the past because we have the depth to do so.
Scheme and philosophy. All right, next question. All right, I like this one from Mule Skinner. I'm new to your channel, but thoroughly impressed by the content. Thank you, Mule. Tell your friends. Do you believe Liam Eichenberg is a plug-and-play NFL tackle? I know how you feel, Brian.
Absolutely. I was so excited I kept hitting the button twice and mute myself. Mule, I absolutely think he is, for a combination of reasons. Number one, he's a smart football player. Number two, he has a ton of experience. And I think he has the body and the strength where he can play as a rookie. I think sometimes you get these college guys that come in and they're just not quite physically ready to maybe thrive at tackle, or especially inside as rookies. But I think even more so nowadays at tackle, because you're getting these powerful edge rushers and these speed guys that I'm seeing so many speed guys in the NFL that have understood leverage and power to speed, where in the past, some of these more athletic guys would I think Von Miller's a big reason for that, because Von's an athletic speed rusher, but he uses speed to power as well as any speed rusher I've ever seen. And it's just changed the game, where now you're seeing these tackles thinking, I got to worry about speed. And then the guy just gets up in their chest, lifts them up, and knocks the tackle back. So you need to have some power there and some as a blocker. And I think Liam has that. I think he's a strong guy. I think he's battle tested. He's gone against a lot of really good ends the last couple years. So, is he a plug and play guy? Yes, I think he is. Now, are you going to say, okay, I'm going to draft him in the top 10 and expect him to play like a Pro Bowler year one? Probably not. But I think he's a guy that could come in and handle the job as a rookie. My thing with Liam would be, I don't know if he's a guy that's going to come in and as a rookie and then just get steadily better and better and better and better. And then by year 7, he's like the best tackle in the league. I think he's going to kind of be what he is. And that's what I think a lot of teams are looking for. And especially you get down deeper into the first round, those teams are sort of already established teams that are looking for that plug and play tackle. If I'm the Indianapolis Colts and I just was able to trade for Carson Wentz without giving up my first round pick, I'm sitting there thinking, if I can get Liam Eichenberg in the 20s, you now have the left side of your offensive line bookend for the next 10 years. and it's going to be two high quality people with Quentin Nelson and Liam Eichenberg. Or if you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you've had to battle all your injuries, and Eric Fisher's getting a little bit older, he's a guy that I could see coming in and playing tackle, although I know that they have Schwartz there as well. So, yeah, Mule, I absolutely believe that Liam Eichenberg is a plug-and-play NFL tackle. And honestly, I think he's more ready to be a successful NFL tackle than Mike McGlinchey was, because Liam Eichenberg's primary strength, in my view, is pass blocking, where Mike McGlinchey is a 10-year All-Pro if he'd have joined the NFL in the mid-'90s.
Yeah.
Because he's a great run blocker. That's not really the NFL anymore, unless you play for the right couple of teams. Most teams are looking for a guy that can pass block and handle edge rushers, and Liam Eichenberg can do that and do it at a high level. I mean, think about it. He started 38 straight games. He's not given up a sack since the 5th game of his career. And it's not because Ian Book's avoided like 7 sacks of his. He's just that good.
Yeah, right.
And he graded out by Pro Football Focus, and I'm not as enthralled with Pro Football Focus as others, but he did grade out with a better grade in 2020 than Ronnie Stanley had in 2015. And his pass blocking grade this past year was better than any Notre Dame tackle they've had. So yeah, he's a plug and play guy.
All right. Another depth question here for you, Brian from Griff. What have you heard about Jay Brunell? He's kind of the forgotten guy coming out of his recruiting class or the receiver class, but it always seemed to me that he could be a rock solid rotation guy and a steady player.
So Jay actually battled an illness early in his time at Notre Dame. It was not COVID. He had an illness and lost some weight and missed some development time. So that's why he was never in the conversation during the fall. But from what I've been told, he's healthy. He was actually healthy got healthy during the season. It wasn't like a long-term thing. Got healthy during the season. And there's some excitement about what he can bring. He is exactly what Griff said. He's a solid player. He's not going to be a guy that's going to, average 25 yards a catch. He's not a Braden Lindsey kind of player. He's a possession receiver that has potential to be a very good route runner, very good ball skills, and he's a better athlete than I think a lot of people give him credit for because of where he's from. I mean, you don't think guys from the Northeast are necessarily going to come in and be athletic, but he's a quality athlete. Ran a 4.4 at Notre Dame's camp, was the best receiver Notre Dame had at that camp, which is how he got it. They were not going to offer him. He was not a guy that was really on their radar to be offered. But then he just came in and just impressed them athletically with his competitiveness. And he's a really confident kid too. So like, he doesn't care that he was a 3-star.
Right.
He's like, look, I can ball, I can play. And so he's going to be in that battle. But look, right now, if everyone gets an opportunity, it's going to be difficult because it's a deep position. It really is. I'm going to have an article coming up on this soon, just like to answer Joel's question. I was hoping to get it done by next week, but I want to have a film breakdown of how Notre Dame can use 2 running backs. This is another one where I'm going to actually have some up very soon about Notre Dame is loaded at receiver, which means great competition, which means whoever emerges, if it's genuine, they should have a really good receiving core next year. Yes. And I'm excited about that. There's no talent excuse, as we've talked about on this channel before. There's no talent excuse. There's no depth excuse. This should be a loaded group of receivers. And Jay Brunell is part of my confidence in that, where if Jordan Johnson doesn't pan out or gets hurt or whatever else, okay, give Jay a chance. See what he can do, because he's got some skill.
Agreed. AJ says, I commented on a video earlier, which, by the way, we have that question. We were going to talk about it. So I'm glad you brought it up. And I was to say earlier, asking how you guys would feel about Scott Satterfield as a potential BK replacement in the future. Curious what you think. I like him. And if I'm not mistaken, that question that he had as a comment on one of the videos was more like, what do we think is going to happen after Kelly leaves? What is the replacement? What do we think is going to happen, basically? So, and he's offering up Scott Satterfield, and he wants your opinion. Hit it.
I like Scott Satterfield as a coach. I do. I think he did a really good job at Louisville. I'm not concerned about his year 2. I think it was just a weird year. And I don't put a lot into what anybody did in 2020. I just kind of feel like it was just one of those strange years where the offseason really hurt them. I think going into year 2 of the program and missing the spring, I think hurt a program like Louisville with Scott Satterfield as a second-year coach than it would maybe Brian Kelly going into year 11. So, but my concern, however, AJ, is I think some coaches are geographical fits. Examples: Randy Edsall at UConn and Tom O'Brien at Boston College. I think we're both great fits for that region, that type of kid that they can recruit there, the type of just you kind of fit those areas. And then Tom O'Brien, who did some very good things at Boston College, goes to NC State, and he was bad. Randy Edsall goes to Maryland, and you're like, how'd this guy ever get this job? It was a fit thing. You have to be able to fit a place. It's like Pete Carroll's style that worked at USC would not have worked at Notre Dame.
Agreed.
You can't do those. So people have to understand not every job is the same. Jobs are different, and certain coaches are going to fit some jobs better than others. I don't think Scott Satterfield, being a Mid-Atlantic guy through and through, who's having a tough time adjusting to Louisville. That's the reports, right? Like that was looking at the South Carolina job. There was reports he wanted the South Carolina job because he didn't feel like he fit in Louisville. If you're a Southern dude who can't fit in Louisville, you are not going to fit in South Bend, Indiana.
That's a really good point.
So I just feel like the fit is the concern I have. I agree with your premise that he's a great coach. I think he's a really exciting young coach. I love what he did at Appalachian State. I think he's going to do really good things at Louisville as long as he doesn't shoot himself in the foot by looking for a job every offseason, which is going to kill his recruiting and kill his ability to go hire the right kind of staff. Because, like, well, I don't want to come work for you if you're going to leave it, if you're threatening to leave. So he's going to have to show some buy-in, and he's going to have to make sure that he does everything possible to not have his name be linked to jobs this offseason or just leave. Either way, just take a job and leave. But that would be my thing with him. So great coach, or really good young coach, up and coming coach, but not a fit for Notre Dame.
What's your short list?
It's still evolving. Right, it's still evolving. Jeff Brom's going to be my guy, and I know that people are going to say, "Well, his record's this, and this," and I'd say, "Look, there's not a lot of people that could have gone 4-8 with Purdue in 2019 with all the injuries they had." I think fit-wise, I think he'd be a great fit. He's an offensive mind. He's a blue-collar guy. He's very, very smart. Runs sort of a pro-style collegiate offense, which that is not a contradictory phrase. That's to me a real thing. And he grinds on the recruiting trail. I mean, he's gotten some players at Purdue. You're like, Purdue doesn't recruit like that. They're getting 4-star players here and there, and but he needs to start showing it on the field. They do need to kind of start winning some games, or he's not going to be a guy that will have a shot. But he's on there. Matt Campbell has worked. I've been really hesitant with Matt Campbell because I just don't know if he's kind of got that next level personality, but he's really started to impress me as a guy that I'm looking at. And then I'm anti-coach in waiting. I'm anti-promoting coordinators to a place like Notre Dame, but I also think you are foolish to always have these automatics like everyone falls in the same category. I'm really curious to see what Marcus Freeman does these next couple years. I'm more open to the idea of Marcus Freeman as being a coach in waiting than I was Clark Lee, because I don't think Clark Lee would ever be a dynamic recruiter as a head coach.
I completely agree with that.
I think Marcus Freeman,
the personality for it.
Being a dynamic recruiter needs to be like the third or fourth thing on your resume. You need to have, great coach and all those other things first. But if the recruiting piece, you need to have that at Notre Dame. And I don't think Clark Lee has that for a place like Notre Dame.
Right.
I think Marcus Freeman could. So again, I'm not saying he is my coach in waiting. I'm not saying I would hire him. I'm saying he's one of the few coordinators that I would say he's on my radar.
Yes.
And then of course the game, 3 years ago, people were like, hey, what about Tom Herman? So the game changes. There's going to be guys coming up and down. I'm not in the Jamie Chadwell category at Coastal Carolina. That guy has a very unimpressive resume until this past year. So I don't get that one. So there's a lot of these big name young coaches that are not on my radar. But Jeff Brom is, Matt Campbell is, and Marcus Freeman is. Kind of off the top of my head, those are the three that I would look at.
Those are good ones.
And of course, everyone's going to say you got to call Urban Meyer, but I just,
Well, at this point, he's busy.
Yeah,
he's not hosting a show. Saturday anymore, so he's busy. Okay, let's see here. Where do we want to go? How about this one from Connor? Could a determined Drew Pine start after Tyler Buckner leaves for the NFL? Remember the free year of eligibility.
So the premise is essentially that Tyler Buckner comes and leaves in 3 years, and then Drew Pine starts, and essentially Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner are both freshmen. Is what he's saying.
He gets 1 year.
Which is technically true because of the free year. So Drew Pine technically could be considered a freshman this year.
Have 2 years left after that.
Potentially, assuming Tyler Buckner leaves. So, yeah, could I see it? Absolutely. Do I think that Drew Pine would stay around that long? I don't know. I don't want to project he's going to leave. He's a smart kid, comes from a great family. He could say, look, I know who I am. I'm 6 foot, 185-pound quarterback. I need to make sure I get my Notre Dame degree.
Sure.
And if that opportunity comes down the road, then I can be a grad transfer somewhere. But by the time he gets to that level, you may know where Tyler Buckner is. Tyler Buckner may play a little this year, like we hope, and then start in 2022. And then if he has a good year, like, okay, another year of this and this guy's gone. And then, like you said, it could have a couple years of starting left. Yeah, I could see that. I think part of that's going to depend on who Notre Dame signs in these upcoming next 2 recruiting classes.
Agreed.
Because if there's another Tyler Buckner coming down the pike, then I don't see that happening. But if Drew Pine is ever Notre Dame starting quarterback, I'm fine with that.
Me too.
I think he's a good football player. But I do think that if you have a guy that has a more dynamic skill set, you always kind of want to go with that guy, assuming he can run the offense. But I would never – if Drew Pine gets a shot, I think he'll be fine. And I think he's a much better quarterback than people realize. I think people are too obsessed with size. In today's era, I mean, we had back-to-back years when the number 1 pick at quarterback was a 6-foot dude and a 5'10" dude. And they're both doing pretty well in the NFL so far. So
Truth.
The game has changed. Shotgun has changed the entire way that people should look at quarterbacks.
That's a good point because you're away from the line of scrimmage, and those guys aren't getting in your face as much,
right.
Meaning the linemen, they're not in your way. All right, a recruiting question from Josh. Could the staff bring in 3 backs with Evans, Price, and either Hayden or Singleton?
That would be only if you think one of those guys can play somewhere else. And I don't think he's talking about Zach Evans. I think it's Jadarian Price and then Dallin Hayden and Nick Singleton. I don't think any of those guys are necessarily guys who could play another position, maybe slot receiver for a couple of them. But I think the only way you can bring 3 backs in, because you're going to have Chris Tyree is still going to have two years left. Although when this class shows up, he'll be a junior. You have them. You have the 2 kids in the 2021 class, Logan Diggs and Audric Estime, and then you'd have 3 backs. That's 6 scholarship backs, and they're talking about bringing in 2 more tight ends. So you can't have 12 scholarships at 2 positions. 2 positions on offense where you're primarily one guy is on the field at those positions.
Right.
So I think that'd be tough, and I don't know if they're capable of landing all 3 of those guys. But look, I'll say this. If they get a combination of any of those 2 guys, I'm pretty happy about it, especially if one of those 2 guys is Dallin Hayden or Nicholas Singleton. But if they get Price and Evans, that's another strong haul. I'd still say I'd like to see them get a little bit more of a high-level player, but those are 4 good running backs. And if you can get a couple of those guys, that would certainly help and solidify the depth chart. Because, Vince, you know me, I'm not someone who believes you have to have a 5-star running back. If you have a great offensive line in the right system, you can. Notre Dame did not lose to Alabama because they had Kyron Williams at running back.
Exactly.
A 3-star player and not a future first-round pick. He played his butt off, and so I think that would really make for a strong running back call if you could get a couple of those guys.
Brian, I've got to bug out, but I think
you've got class. Yeah, I'm gonna stick around, try to answer some more questions because we got a lot of them again today. So
I think the one from Maddie K55 is your next one, but I'll just let that one go. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it. I have to go mold some minds here at my other job, teaching the young ones. So it's been a lot of fun, but I don't want to get fired. So I love everybody.
I don't want you to get fired either.
No, and I will. We'll talk to you guys. I'll talk to you guys next time we do one of these lives, which I'm really looking forward to. So, Brian, I'll talk to you later, my friend.
Thanks, bud. All right, so Maddie K, I'm here with you. So Maddie K asks, I love our receiving core, and as you guys already say, there has to be a philosophy change to get these athletes the ball. Which receiver is going to mesh the best with whoever the QB is and why? I don't know if they run the same system they've been running, then I think what you're looking for is the bigger guys, Kevin Austin, Deion Colsey, players like that, being that's who's going to mesh well with the quarterbacks, the guys that need the vertical routes, the one-on-ones, and those type of things. If they go to more of an explosive, balanced passing game, which is what we've been advocating for, then I think guys like Xavier Watts and Braden Lindsey and Lorenzo Styles are going to play. And they're kind of sending mixed messages on the recruiting trail. Part of me they see a lot of tight ends being offered, but then they're going after guys like Caden Saunders, and I don't know why you'd recruit him if you're going to run the offense you've been running this past couple seasons. So I just think it's not necessarily about whoever wins the quarterback job. I think all the receivers can fit with whoever wins the quarterback job. It just depends on what system they're running it in. That to me is really going to answer that. Maddie, if I didn't answer your question, if I didn't take the right angle with it, just ask again, and I'll try to answer the way you want it. John A1 asks, do you think Osita Eguanu has a chance to crack the lineup in 2021? If he does, what does he look like in the projected defense? To me, Osita's a guy that I've heard some really good things about from a practice standpoint. He's a really good special teams player for Notre Dame this past year. He's athletic. He's powerful. I think he fits this defense really well. We might have mentioned this on a previous show. I know Vince and I have talked about it, and sometimes we did we talk about this and off the air, or did we talk about it on the air? But he's one of the guys that I think projects even better in the Marcus Freeman defense than he did the Clark Lee defense, because he can be a thumper, but he's also really rangy and athletic. And that's kind of the ideal position you want. Is you don't want necessarily a pure Mike that can only play tackle to tackle. You want a guy that's got some range, some coverage ability. And I think Osita has that, but he's also physical and he can play inside. So I could see him playing Mike or the Will spot in this defense. So will he have a chance to crack the lineup in 2021? That's going to be a little tougher, because there's so many established players. You've got Drew White and Bo Bauer at Mike. You've got Shane Simon. You've got Maris and Jack Kaiser, depending on what he does. But I think in a 2 years, potentially, maybe so, because you're going to lose Drew White and some other guys may not pan out. But look, you've got a new linebacker coach, and there's always opportunities for guys to make that fresh mark. So do I think he'll do it? I'm not going to predict it because he's buried so deep right now. But if he did it, John, I wouldn't be shocked, because I think he's a really good football coach. John also asks, who returns punts in 2021? I would imagine Lawrence Keys is going to get a shot. I'd like to see Lorenzo Styles get a shot as well. Those are two guys that I'd like to see. But there's also going to be some walk-on somewhere that they'll find that can catch the ball that will get an opportunity to do that as well. SGC asks, are head coaches only as good as their assistant coaches? Yeah, I think so. I think there's something to that. I think that, look, you can be a great coach, but great coaches value surrounding themselves with other great coaches. They understand that. Lou Holtz was really good at that. And I think if you study his career, as the quality of his assistant coaches went down, so did his success, because you can't coach everybody. The head coach has to set the tone. He has to set the agenda. He has to set the philosophy, the culture of the team, and then he needs to hire the best people he can to carry it out. I think Urban Meyer has shown that. He's surrounded himself with brilliant coaches throughout his career. Nick Saban understands that you need great coaches around you, because, again, if you're coaching the defense, you can't then be coaching the offense. If you then walk over the offense, you can't be coaching the defense. You need to surround yourself with great coaches. And so, yeah, I would say he's only as good, but I think I would take that as a positive. Look, I'm a Denver Bronco fan, right? And you go back and look at, when Mike Shanahan, I think he's a brilliant head coach, but part of the success he had is because he had a great offensive line coach. He had a great offensive coordinator, Gary Kubiak. He had one of the best running back coaches in the business, and Bobby Turner. So I think you needed that, and I think the great coaches understand that. And if you don't have great assistants, then that's going to limit your ability. And that's why I get so hard on Coach Kelly when he does make hires that I feel are beneath what he could have done or should have done. It can frustrate you, because you know that this guy's a good coach, just like you have a good quarterback, but to win a championship, you need a great quarterback or a great offensive line coach or a great defensive coordinator. And so I think he needs to do that. And I think he needs to hire more people that are from the outside, simply because hiring more people that bring different voices, different viewpoints, different backgrounds, and also people that might be maybe a little bit more willing to challenge him and get him out of his comfort zone. Because I don't think Brian Kelly on offense especially really likes being out of his comfort zone a whole lot. So let me just look through here and see if there's anything else. I think that we've got to everything so far. Jay Brunell, we talked about. Got Joel's question. Yeah, I think we got everything here, guys. So I think that is going to wrap it up. So unless anyone has any more questions, that is going to do it for this episode of the Irish Breakdown Mailbag. So we will be back every Friday. We'll be back next Friday again for the show. It's going to be around 1 o'clock every time. We'll try to fit it in an hour, because Vince is on a little bit of a time crunch. But as long as you guys have questions, we'll keep rolling with it. So we appreciate you guys being here. And also, look, here's something we're also going to request from you all. we are obviously setting up our schedule for the spring and for the summer on content, but we want to hear from you guys. What are things you'd like for us to discuss? What are some articles you'd like to see me write about? What are some topics you'd like to hear us to discuss or debate on the podcast and then on the YouTube channel? So the goal of this is not to necessarily write stuff that I like to write about, which is going to be a part of it, but I want to write and we want to produce stuff that you're interested in and that you have questions about, or you'd like to learn about, or you'd maybe even like to challenge us about. So if you have those, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on our Facebook group, the Irish Breakdown Notre Dame fan page. Leave a question in one of our YouTube videos, or shoot me an email. My email's about as easy as you can be. It's brian@irishbreakdown.com. So any way you want to leave a question, leave it and we'll try to get to it. But for Vince and Brian, hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you again soon.